Chapter 11. My Red. My plane arrived mid-morning in Idaho, and with it came a sense of returning to a place I had always held dear. The American West had long resonated with me. Its untamed openness, mountains and rivers, giving way to wide country that stretched into long, unbroken horizons, reminded me of the regions I had loved in Asia, along with the cold, brutal winters, followed by beautiful springs, blazing summers, and true autumns. Seasons mattered there. Space mattered. Fewer people. Stepping onto the ground felt less like arriving somewhere new and more like being recognized by the land itself. I was picked up from the airport and drove through a brief orientation of the area. We stopped for the DOT drug test and handled the formalities. Afterward, I was taken to a hotel to rest for the afternoon and wait for Red to arrive. The hotel sat on the same lot as the truck stop, close enough to smell diesel and hear engines moving in and out. That evening, Red phoned to inform me he had arrived and was pulling into the truck stop. He would meet me as soon as he parked his tractor and trailer. I walked out of the hotel toward the meeting area, scanning the rows of trucks and trailers, knowing he was doing the same. We spotted each other from a distance at almost the same moment. There was no hesitation, just recognition. The kind that happens before words or introductions. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, standing with a stillness that made him easy to identify. There was a restful authority about him, not loud or forced, just settled. He carried himself like someone who knew what he was doing and didn't need to explain it. There was strength there, but something balanced, almost disarming. Tough and gentle, existing in the same space. There was no place in me for emotional wandering or romantic ideas. I wasn't there for that. This was practical. We had talked. We had plans. Now it was time to see if those conversations translated into real life. When we closed the distance between us, the moment held a slight awkwardness, the natural kind that comes when two people step from conversation into a shared environment for the first time. But it also felt safe, businesslike, with an unspoken question hovering between us. I don't remember if we shook hands or simply acknowledged each other with a nod or a wave. What I remember is him placing his hand lightly behind my back as we turned to walk. Later, Red told me he considered himself good at reading people. He said when we first met, he couldn't read me at all. There was nothing for him to read. The walls were up, clean and solid. I wasn't hiding something. I was protecting what little stability I had left. The parking lot stayed alive around us. Trucks shifting gears, drivers climbing down from cabs after long hauls, people drifting between the fuel island, the store, and the hotel. By the time I met Red in real life, I was still spinning. That is the only word that fits. I took one step at a time because stopping felt dangerous. If I stopped, I was afraid everything I had been holding together would finally come apart. Inside, the battlefield had never actually gone. I had just learned how to hide the noise. It was late evening when Red asked if I wanted to see the truck before shutting down for the night. I climbed into the passenger seat. He lived simply. A truck's interior space requires careful measurement, and even a little clutter quickly turns into chaos. Seeing how little I had brought settled something in him. It also said something about me before I spoke a word. I was used to living lean. Life had stripped me down more than once already. The training trucks at school had been uniform, stripped, and staged for learning. I had no real understanding of what living inside one actually looked like. I studied everything with curiosity. The sleeper area was warm and surprisingly comfortable. The bedding was folded and tucked carefully, showing attention to detail. The pillows had clearly traveled thousands of miles, softened and shaped by constant use. Coffee cups sat ready on a small ledge, a microwave rested neatly in its spot, and clothing was stored in tight, practical spaces that made the most of every inch. It was not decorated or personalized in any obvious way, but it was lived in, tidy, and uncluttered. The space felt calm rather than cramped because everything had a place and purpose. Red moved through it with ease, explaining how everything worked and how daily life on the road shaped itself. He was organized and particular, but relaxed in the routine. Methodical and self-contained, he kept only what was necessary, and each item had a role. The truck reflected him. Nothing wasted, no excess clutter, no unnecessary items crowding the small space. Everything was arranged to serve its function efficiently and to make life on the road manageable. I walked into the entire situation, expecting everything and nothing all at once, finding myself suspended in the middle, stepping from a shattered life into one that had not yet taken shape. I was still adjusting to the violent shift from familiarity to the complete unknown. Instinct and intuition carried me more than emotion did. We sat there together, talking in short, practical conversation, while both of us studied each other. That was our nature, observing first, deciding later. Red would tell me afterward that he reached a point where he simply moved things along. He needed to know if I was going to be his trainee or something more, or if I would disappear back into my world. I sat facing frontward, analyzing everything around me. The sounds of trucks moving through the lot, air brakes releasing, doors slamming. Diesel engines idling in long mechanical conversations. Survival mode was still the only setting my body recognized. Grief was raw beneath layers of control. I was still moving through life, painted for war, armor strapped on so tightly, it felt like part of my skin. Inside, I was screaming for the other side of it, for safety and rest, for someone to see past the blankness and know I was fighting for my life under the surface. Then the atmosphere shifted. There was a calm that settled in, a moment of comfort and reassurance that came without warning. I sat there holding that thought the way a soldier holds position when the guns suddenly go quiet. Face still neutral, no signal given, no white flag raised. My body stayed rigid, trained for impact, while inside everything was listening, waiting, braced for the next strike or the next command. I didn't lean toward him or away from him. I didn't know how to lower my guard without dropping it completely, and I wasn't sure I would survive that. And then, without warning, Red leaned over and kissed me. There was no dramatic build-up. The kiss was intentional, measured, and deliberate. It was not rushed or careless, and it lingered long enough to feel real, long enough to express something neither of us had found words for yet. Something inside me gave way instantly. It felt like battle gear falling to the ground all at once. I dropped my sword. For the first time since losing everything, I forgot to stand ready for impact. I remembered I was still a woman. The war inside me had not healed. But in that moment, it eased enough for me to breathe without bracing for the next strike. I did not feel rescued. That was never what I needed. I felt protected, held in a way that allowed me to stop fighting long enough to simply exist. I had missed that more than I had ever admitted, even to myself. It was not just physical closeness, it was a presence, the kind that lets you put weight down without fear that everything will collapse while your hands are empty. I had craved that without knowing how deeply it had settled into me. Red was still a stranger, but a voice inside my spirit, the one that had guided me through every hard decision of my life, spoke clearly then. It was quiet, carrying no emotion, yet its message was unmistakable. It said, Trust this. That voice had rarely led me astray when I took the time to listen. Years of prayer, reflection, and hard-earned experience had shaped it into something reliable. I followed it the only way I knew how to. I sat there, uncertain of what came next, yet aware that something fundamental had shifted. For a fleeting moment, I let myself want something simple. I wanted care without negotiation, and rest without earning it, desiring a space to set down the weight I had carried for so long. I imagined standing beside Red, grounded, strong enough to match my strength without competing with it. He did not control, correct, or try to fix me, but he could hold his ground and allow me to hold mine. It was late, but we still needed to prepare for the next day. A load was scheduled for pickup early in the morning, and both of us understood what that meant. Red had already driven and worked a 14-hour shift, arriving on fumes, yet moving through everything with focus and precision. Work came first, and there was no time to waste. We both naturally operated with discipline and deliberate intention, making each decision count. Red walked me to the hotel lobby, already carrying the sense that he might come inside with me. I could feel it. I could feel how easy it would be to say yes. That kiss stayed with me. Standing there in the hallway, everything in me wanted to invite him in, to disappear into rest, into warmth, into being held, to relax, to simply enjoy the presence of another human being. What I missed after losing my married life was never just touching. It was a presence, a shared space, and intimacy. I missed love, the feeling of skin on skin, but it ran deeper than that. It was the sense of becoming one with another person in every aspect of life, letting every defense fall and simply existing together. I had waited before and remained single long into my 30s. Once married, I loved that life. If distraction had been what I wanted, it was always available. One night, answers to long questions are simple to find. That was never the ache. What I missed was oneness inside the safety of marriage, the holy shelter it creates, a place where two people lay down their defenses and choose each other over themselves. That was why I said no firmly, even though I desperately wanted to say yes. I could feel the pull, the longing, but I knew it was not the right time. Red respected my decision without question. He returned to his truck, leaving me with a quiet space to process my own thoughts. We said goodnight and met again the next morning. And so we both lived life, with training bleeding straight into work. Our days stretched long, 12 hours at a time, every day. When training ended, we split the clock between us. 12 hours were mine, 12 hours his. I drove through the daylight, navigating the miles and learning the flow of the road, while Red drove at night, keeping the truck moving under the stars and the quiet hum of the highway. About half the time, it looked exactly like that. Our changeovers floated between early morning and late afternoon, depending on how the miles stacked up. We crossed paths without ever really stopping, passing each other through the narrow space of the cab. The curtain shifted and the bunk creaked. The drivers and passenger seats traded places. A nod and a handoff passed between us as we settled into our shifts, coffee still warm beside us. The truck never really slept, moving steadily through the night and into the day while we rotated behind the wheel. The other half of the time, we stole an hour or two together. Red might wake, coffee in hand, waiting for my clock to catch up. Or I would wake early and sit in the passenger seat before my shift began. Sometimes at the end of my drive, I stayed up front, eating an early evening meal while Red eased into his night, an hour, maybe two, then back to the handoff. Sometimes we found a little extra time and grabbed food or walked the perimeter of a truck stop, just to feel human again. Most days, though, we ran the highways and the clock. Even fuel stops became choreography. One of us fueled while the other showered. Then we switched. The first time I showered, Red assumed I would take the usual half hour while he fueled the truck, wiped down the windows, and emptied the trash. I walked to the truck stop and into the bathroom area with the showers. By the time he turned around, I had already finished in 12 minutes. I returned ready to go, and the truck was fueled, cleaned, and checked, with every task accounted for. We climbed back in, coffee and snacks in hand, and rolled again. This kind of life suited me, and it suited him too. From our view behind the windshield, we rarely experienced the hardships other drivers talked about. Many spoke of long stretches away from home and the constant strain of living in a cab, the way the trucking life could demand more than it offered. For us, the ride provided a clear routine, a sense of momentum, and a purpose that came from mastering the truck and the miles with focus and skill. Our favorite runs were coast to coast. We planned roughly 48 hours in advance, mapping the route ahead between pick and drop points. By the time we reached the first stop, we already knew the miles, the traffic patterns, and the potential challenges that lay ahead for the next 2 days. Some routes seemed faster, saving time and effort, while others slowed progress and drained energy. Knowing the road in this way allowed us to avoid getting stuck in rush hour, time our arrivals into cities, and manage long stretches efficiently so the truck kept moving without unnecessary stops. The West Coast carried its own brand of chaos. Washington through Oregon into California, often becoming a slow-moving ribbon of brake lights. Los Angeles swallowed hours, regardless of arrival time. On the East Coast, turnpikes boxed us between concrete walls and narrow lanes, while cars rushed past as if trucks obeyed different laws of physics. Posted speeds mocked reality until another truck roared by and proved them possible. Wyoming offered the opposite in wind, open space, and long reminders of how small 80,000 pounds can feel when nature decides otherwise. There were calmer stretches too. Running north or south of Las Vegas, the neon dissolved into the desert. Heat climbed through the cab during the day and drained into endless darkness at night, where stars pressed close enough to feel reachable. I preferred those roads, constantly weighing time against distance and against speed. We learned quickly that interstate mountain passes demanded respect, preparation, and patience, especially in winter. We never crossed them casually. Chains were ready. We studied the weather. We topped off the fuel. Food, water, and coffee were always in stock. If a pass indicated we had finished moving for the day, we accepted it without argument. Donner Pass taught humility. We had waited on the eastern side of the pass, watching the forecast like gamblers studying odds, before deciding to make a run for it. Snow chased us in. We chained up in darkness, heavy links freezing our fingers, breath burning our lungs. Traffic disappeared. That was when we realized we were the only ones still moving. Somewhere behind us, the highway closed. We drove for hours with 0 other vehicles in sight. Later, chains clanking, frozen snow and ice against asphalt, we reached a line of parked vehicles. Closed ahead too. There was nowhere to go. We shut down where we sat, just another truck grounded by the mountain. For us, that never felt like defeat. It was simply part of the agreement you make with winter roads. We climbed behind the curtain into what we jokingly called the snuggle bunk, a narrow sleeper that somehow held warmth, exhaustion, and comfort all at once. We always carried everything we needed: water, snacks, coffee, blankets, and each other. Outside, the storm decided. Inside, we rested and waited. At first light, the highway patrol knocked on doors and waved us ahead. We rode on as if nothing had happened. The COVID-19 pandemic changed everything. Sometimes we ran legally exempt from standard driving limits. More hours meant more miles. More miles meant more money. Red began teaching me the business behind the wheel, with rates, timing, leverage, and strategy. He showed me how freight moved and how money moved with it. We were building something. We thrived on the nomadic life, minimal living, hard work, a willingness to do what others didn't want to do or couldn't do, and that is where opportunity lived. Then, just like that, after only a few months into our journey, we got married. There was no build-up and no long planning. We took a route through Las Vegas and decided it was as good a place as any to make it official. The simplicity made sense to us, and it fit the way we were living at that moment. We parked the truck at a casino hotel, rented a limo, and drove straight to a chapel that offered drive-through weddings. We wore t-shirts, shorts, and flip-flops, and there was no crowd, no ceremony, no expectations beyond the two of us standing together. In that quiet, unassuming way, we made a commitment that felt entirely ours, wrapped in laughter, ease, and a sense of shared purpose. That evening, the limo took us out to the dam outside the city. We skipped the tourist walk. We just stood there, watching the sun set behind the mountains, light softening across the water in a way Las Vegas rarely allows. It was never about ceremony. There were no relatives and no audience. It was simply about choosing each other, clean and uncomplicated. The next day, we picked up a load and rolled out. All my life, I had survived on the bare minimum. I had traveled the world, which felt like its own success. But financially, I rarely held more than what carried me to the next month. I hesitate to call it poverty, but it lived close enough to be recognized. I carried a quiet fear about the future and what it might look like in years to come. I often imagined myself working long past retirement simply because there would be no other option. In my mind, I pictured ending up in my 80s as a greeter at one of the big department supermarkets, smiling at strangers while leaning on a cart for balance, and hoping my shift ended before my knees did. When I entered trucking, my expectations were far simpler. I only hoped life might become a little easier to manage. Wealth never crossed my mind, and the idea of earning 6 figures felt far beyond anything I imagined for myself. Red did far more than teach me how to drive. He introduced me to new ways of thinking about business and money. Before trucking, Red had built and lost success, a self-made millionaire undone by the 2008 crash. He rebuilt from nothing more than once. By the time I met him, he carried both confidence and caution, earned the hard way. Red added me to his credit cards as soon as we had met, not out of generosity, but strategy. He knew credit meant opportunity. He taught me to build it fast and use it wisely. We shared a similar philosophy about finances and partnership. We believed marriage meant combining resources into one shared foundation, one bucket, one plan. We saved together. We spent together on what mattered or what was necessary. Neither of us asked permission to spend money, but we both understood the consequences of careless decisions. That mutual responsibility created mutual trust without restriction. It was never about control, it was about alignment. One night, I suddenly became ill and had to pull onto a dark shoulder while traffic roared past. Red stepped out with me and held his jacket up like a shield while I tried to recover beside the truck. When we climbed back into the cab, the tension broke and we both started laughing. The jacket he had been using as protection was neon yellow and brilliantly reflective. If anything, it had probably announced our situation to every driver on the highway more clearly than a billboard. Life inside a space that's small tends to magnify everything. A simple disagreement can feel large in the moment, yet it rarely lasts because there is nowhere to carry it and nowhere to hide from each other for long. Living in a truck means you either learn to talk things through or you spend the next 1,000 miles sitting in stubborn silence, which neither of us had much patience for. Red and I were not naturally calm people who glided through conflict. We were more like fire and ice, each pushing hard in our own direction until the tension finally settled and common sense returned. Most of the time, that meant a blunt conversation, a long stretch of driving, and eventually someone making a dry comment that broke the mood and reminded us how ridiculous the argument had been in the first place. In a strange way, the tight space forced honesty. There was no dramatic exit, no separate rooms, and no chance to nurse a grudge for days. By the time the next fuel stop came around, we usually found ourselves laughing again, because sharing a truck across thousands of miles leaves very little room for pride and far more room for learning how to live with each other. Then perimenopause arrived without invitation and without any interest in my schedule. Hot flashes showed up in cold mountain passes, night sweats turned the sleeper into a damp cave, and my body began changing its rules without bothering to explain them. Some days my joints ached, my mood swung wider than I expected, and my cycle lost any sense of predictability. On top of that, my system seemed to rebel in other uncomfortable ways that made long stretches between truck stops feel like poor planning. It felt as if my body had decided to renegotiate every agreement we had made over the years. All of it came at the same time I was asking that same body to manage 80,000 pounds of truck and freight, shifting weather systems, tight delivery windows, and the daily work of building a relationship with Red inside a moving space the size of a closet. Grief was still working through its own unfinished business somewhere in the background, appearing at odd moments when I thought I had already made peace with it. My system eventually slowed down in ways I did not fully understand at the time. I lost weight and leaned out more than I expected, which probably had as much to do with stress as anything else. I did not think of it as good or bad in the moment. It simply felt like life arriving all at once, and I handled it the only way I knew how, by putting my head down and getting on with it. One afternoon, something inside me broke open without warning. I could not point to a single cause. It may have been nothing specific, or it may have been the accumulation of everything that had come before. Survival, loss, and rebuilding had carried me along without leaving much room to sit still and absorb any of it. We had parked early at a truck stop while waiting for our delivery window. I sat alone in the driver's seat, watching trucks come and go through the lot, while Red rested behind the curtain, preparing for the night shift. The cab was quiet in that late afternoon lull, the kind of still moment that rarely happens on the road. Then grief rose from somewhere deep and buried inside me. It arrived suddenly and without restraint, first as that familiar sound from deep in my chest, and then as heaving sobs that demanded space to come out. Red did not try to fix it because there was nothing to fix. He stayed where he was behind the curtain and let the moment exist without interruption. For me, that quiet restraint mattered more than words would have. Knowing he was there, occupying the other half of the truck, gave me the safety to let the storm pass and the time to breathe through something that had been waiting a long while to surface. Somewhere in the middle of those months, we took a long weekend off. was nothing elaborate, just a pause in the miles and a chance to step away from the steady routine of pickups, deliveries, and fuel stops. By then, Red and I had already simplified our lives even further. We had sold both of our personal vehicles and reduced what we owned to what could travel with us. During training, I had kept TJ's ashes in my pickup truck, resting in a small wooden box that followed in tow wherever I went. When the time came to bring my things into the truck, Red did not hesitate. He simply told me to bring them with us. There was no long conversation about it and no attempt to make the moment heavier than it already was. He understood what that box represented and treated it with quiet respect, making space for it in the small world we were building inside the cab. Red met every chapter of my past without flinching. He stepped into my present without trying to rewrite it. I think most men would struggle to understand or navigate loving a woman who was still a widow, still grieving, while building a new career and life beside someone else. Parts of my life, before and after, had blended together in ways that could have been uncomfortable or complicated. Red never treated it that way. He gave me space when I needed it while standing beside me. When he told me to bring the ashes, there was no pause or any discomfort. I have always believed that we return the body to the earth, not out of sentimentality, but out of stewardship. When the time came, Red walked with me into the mountains of Idaho and stopped exactly where I asked him to stop. The air was clean, and the land stretched wide in every direction, quiet in a way that made the moment feel settled and certain. He stood beside me for a moment and then stepped back when I walked on a little further. The scattering itself was mine to do, and it felt right that way. Final in a way that did not feel harsh, but complete. Idaho felt like a place TJ would have loved. The land was vast and fertile, with open sky and deep stretches of wilderness that invited a person to pause and slow down. The outdoors had always been where he found peace when the rest of the world grew loud and demanding. Leaving him there made sense to me. Red never intruded on that moment or tried to shape it into something else. He simply remained nearby, standing on the ground behind me and sharing the quiet of that place while I said goodbye in my own way. When I walked back to him, I knew that chapter of my life had reached its close, and the weight I carried seemed a little easier. During that same weekend, I showed Red photos and videos from my years in Asia. Until then, those stories had lived mostly in words, pieces of a life he had heard about, but had never seen with his own eyes. As we sat together going through them one by one, he began to see the places, the people, and the version of me that had lived there for so many years. It became a quiet moment of release for me, and also the moment when Red met the full history of my heart, the woman he had married. We ran hard for just under 2 years. During that time, the trucking industry itself began to shift beneath our feet. The lanes that had once built our success started to change, and the patterns we had learned so well no longer carried the same reliability. The pandemic slowly edged towards something resembling normal life again, yet the industry we had come to understand no longer felt quite the same. We tried to roll with those changes, the only way we knew how. We studied routes, adjusted plans, and searched for new lanes that might carry the same promise the old ones once had. Still, every direction felt like a slow roll toward a stop sign. The work continued, but the momentum we once relied on had thinned and seemed to test our patience as much as our skill. Through all of it, Red remained beside me while I built a future I had never believed was possible for myself. Life on the road measured time in miles, fuel stops, and delivery windows. Yet within all that constant motion, he became the one place where I no longer felt like I was passing through. Somewhere in the middle of all those miles, Red, the businessman and truck driver, became something far more personal to me. He became my Red.